Here's another bit of information on how they try to manipulate the truth. And again, if people understand this, which I'm sure the audience does, it isn't too difficult to read between the lines. But New Zealand this year has reported its largest emigration in history, of which 50% of the citizens this year leaving New Zealand are New Zealand-born citizens. 50% of the people, leaving New Zealand this year are New Zealand-born citizens. The largest net emigration recorded in history, yet inward migration is still higher than the outgoing. So this is a nice classic case of people born in the country who created a successful culture are being forced out because they're undermined by mass migration policies. Population's still rising, but the actual natives of the country are dispersing. And what do they do to try and manipulate this data? At the same time as this data was released, I've literally just looked it up a few minutes ago, New Zealand comes along and says, we are now opening our visa doors more substantially than they already are, allowing these sorts of migrant entrants. And now it's all netted or guised under the so-called working nomad visa systems, which makes it easier now for tourists that are working remotely to travel to New Zealand. Now, I'll tell you something. People that have the ability to work remotely generally are in software or IT, this kind of industry. And frankly, I don't know why they want to move to New Zealand out of all the places that are available to them if they're mobile. You would go to Vietnam, you would go to places in South America where the cost of living is substantially less, and the natural kind of beauty is to a greater extent. I'm not saying New Zealand isn't a beautiful place, but it's certainly far more expensive than places like Vietnam, etc. And again, there's no way to discern who it is that is truly a working nomad, and I personally think the whole thing is nonsense, as I've just given an example to. It's simply a counterbalance to the fact that skilled natives are leaving and the influx of non-skilled migrants is substantially heightened by that. And if you think, well, how can you discern the difference between skilled and unskilled? Well, usually migration is a derivative of the native population requiring services that they're no longer able to provide, simply because they're unwilling to work in lesser roles. So 50% of those outgoing numbers are a derivative of native individuals who naturally would be earning a higher amount than incoming migrants, and especially given that New Zealand is a Western country. We're not talking about Bangladesh or anywhere else. And I don't have to quote the numbers, I haven't even looked them up. I've been in New Zealand, I worked there in 2012, so I know the kind of characters that are migrating there. We're not talking about Swiss nationals with PhDs in neuroscience. We're talking about migrants from South America primarily, India, Bangladesh, these places, non-skilled workers. So if 50% of the population is outgoing this year, and let's assume that trend continues from here on, around about that number, then what is the justification for bringing in unskilled workers, which are in excess of the outgoing numbers? It doesn't really make sense, does it, at all? So again, it's the same principle that's being applied in the United States, in Europe. It's all about undermining the existing population. The war in the Ukraine is just another example by which to slice and divide cultures that are in similitude and kind of give this illusion that somehow they're enemies. The Friends are, of course, people that share no cultural similarities whatsoever. The Friends are people from Central African Republic, or we need to bring in people from Syria, or we need to bring in people from Bangladesh. And yet the Russians supposedly are enemies when they share a culture that's aligned to pretty much all of Eastern Europe, because it used to be one state and pretty much is all Slavic culture combined into one unifying formula. Of course, artificially it's been divided, and people still believe that there's these enemies that share the same colour skin, that have often the same religion, the same cuisines and the same weather. But they're, of course, the enemies. Well, people from the abyss of Syria or Bangladesh or India or wherever, they share more similitude. It's just the same strategy applied time and time again, generation after generation, decade after decade, century after century, millennia after millennia. And this is how these people retain their control and their authority, slice and conquer. And it's kind of sad to see, because how do people really buy this nonsense? It's just beyond me. It's so in your face, really. So there we go. That's another little vlog.